fight and we will win.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Henson. Firstly, can I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Sleaford North Hykeham, for getting this debate. It's been very apparent listening to it quite how important an issue it is. She made a brilliant and comprehensive speech, and others following her have pretty much filled in all the details. So I'm going to be fairly brief in my response, my follow-up now. The current policy on large-scale solar farms fails to take into account the country's landscape and environment. My right honourable friend, the member for Ludlow, said earlier in intervention on my honourable friend that this is a matter of balance. He was exactly right. And this policy is badly designed and does not deliver any sense of balance whatsoever. Largely, I suspect, because of the dead hand of the Treasury in it, but I'll come back to that in a moment. And we've heard a series of horror stories, the latest from my honourable friend, an old friend from Gainsborough. I sat here with a sense of horror when he talked about 10,000 acres under these nightmarish destroyers of the countryside. And of course, the government's national infrastructure tracker shows 26 of these huge projects. And I have one. I have one very close to me, put up by a company called Boom Power in East Yorkshire. And it covers 3,500 acres. One project alone, 3,500 acres. It's very hard for most people to imagine what 3,500 acres is. It's virtually from here to the horizon in most directions. But it's 2,000 football fields, or as somebody's already said, it's about 1.5 times, I think, the size of Heathrow Airport. And I was sitting here watching the member for North Durham speak in the main chamber. It's about the size of the city of Durham. A city with a population of 50,000 people. Imagine if you wanted to put in a planning application for houses for 50,000 people, quite how long we'd spend in the process and considering it. It would never happen, of course. So that's what we're dealing with. And despite the fact that they change the character, the use, the appearance of the landscape, they seek to carpet. The person who ever drafted this policy did not have any concept of the rights of local individuals. In effect, because of the national infrastructure rules, the bigger and more damaging the project, the less say local people have. I mean, it's an astonishing perversion of natural justice in these things. And whoever designed the project didn't also take into account the other thought process of the developers, and that is that they would need to seek to put them near to hubs in the national grid. So not only do you get enormous solar farms, you also get lots of them in a single area. So the reason the one is being proposed for my constituency is because of the proximity of Drax Power Station, which means next door in Selby and in the other East Yorkshire and North Yorkshire seats, you've got a proliferation of them. So not only are you penalising 5 villages in my constituency, you're penalising another 5 or 10 villages, the next one and the one after and the one after, all in one place. And as I said earlier in my intervention, my honourable friend, we dismiss these people as NIMBYs. This is their life savings we're damaging. It's their lives and their life savings. And maybe their children's life savings we're damaging. So we should keep in mind what we might call the importance of individual property rights in doing this. Now, there are countless more innovative policies that could be implemented. We've heard, I think the one that seems to be most popular today in terms of what we might do instead would be to legislate to either incentivize, massively incentivize, or even mandate in some cases the use of the roofs of all new buildings, certainly all new industrial buildings, all new warehouses, all new barns and so on, but also, frankly, houses too. I mean, what has happened in the course of the whole energy policy of the last 20 years is governments have changed the economics to make various things different. I mean, so the solar farms are now more economic than they were 20 years ago. Wind farms are more economic than they were 20 years ago. And the creation of a requirement to use roofs would also engender a new industry. Already, Elon Musk has got new designs for solar cells that look like tiles on buildings, that look like and so you would do away with the concerns over the as it were, the aesthetic effect. And they will become cheaper and cheaper if the government does this. So there's a need, I say to the Minister, for some imagination in this, to say to ourselves, what do we want this to look like in 10 years' time, and then design the policies to encourage the industry to deliver just that. Now, we've heard about the effects on farmland. I'll be very brief on this because it's been talked through quite a lot. But farmland, of course, as somebody said, I think my honourable friend from Gainsborough said, farmland is already a solar farm. I mean, it turns sunlight into food, you know? And it's much better at that, much more useful at that, much more flexible and effective at that than actually using it for electricity. And we are, of course, we now have less farmland in production than we have at any time since 1945, since the Second World War. And that date, of course, is important in this context. In these dangerous times which we're now in, you know, do we really think it's sensible that we have to import almost half our food, 46% of our food, in the event of the breakdown, not even the necessity of a continental war, in the event of a serious breakdown of international trade, which has happened a couple of times already through COVID in Ukraine, in the event of a serious breakdown, our ability to access food becomes a real problem. We had a rehearsal during COVID of some of that. And again, so it is not wise. In the papers the last few days, there's a lot of coverage for the King installing, I think, 2,000 panels at Sandringham to create cheap electricity for himself. You know what that is? 2,000 panels? It's 5 acres. That's 1/700th of this one plan I'm talking about here. 1/200th of the 10,000 acres that my honourable friend was talking about earlier around Gainsborough. So that's fine. Small scale is fine. Even 100 acres properly placed is fine, or 200 acres properly placed is fine. But what we're getting now, this massive, huge industrialization of the countryside, simply is not fine. You know, in my part of the world, I have the villages of Spaldington, Willetoft, Brint, Gribthorpe and Foglethorpe, basically surrounded by solar cells. That's the plan, to surround all these people. All these people's future environments are being thwarted by that. Now, I hadn't intended to talk about the effect of the Treasury, but since we've got a very smart minister here, I think there is one philosophical point I'll make to him. When the Treasury sets out, and I speak from long, sore experience as a minister in the past, when the Treasury sets out to determine which policy works best or not, their driving concern essentially is cheapness, is low cost, minimising the taxes required to run a policy. Now, that is understandable. That's sort of what they're paid for, right? But because they're so powerful, that overwhelms what ought to be the decision, which economists would call a cost-benefit analysis. In other words, what is the cost to the state, but what's also the cost to our citizens and individuals who have to cope with this? And my honourable friend for Gainsborough mentioned what it did to house prices, for example. We know what it does to people's environments. And what has happened here is you've got a policy where that second component has been completely ignored. That's what I mean by the dead hands of the Treasury. And when he comes to have the arguments on this that I hope he's going to have inside his department, he should talk about a proper cost-benefit analysis. So just as when we're looking at the costs, the energy costs of a photovoltaic cell, we shouldn't just look at its cost here. We should look at the cost to make it, the coal cost, the cost of oppressing Uyghurs and so on. We should also, in terms of the overall policy, look at the impact on everybody, and the impact on local land values and local housing values as well. Because if he does that, he'll come up with a completely different policy. So to come back to the simpler arguments of the day, I agree with my honourable friend in his call for effectively a ban on these solar farms, obviously on greenbelt, but also on proper flexible land, which includes 3B. I live in the countryside of my constituency. I am surrounded by land which is 3A and 3B. I can't tell the difference. Neither can the farmers who farm it. You know, that's where we are. And when it comes to the 3,500 acres I was talking about, they don't know the difference either. The only rule we've got is, as we've heard, the assessors paid for by the investors in the farm. So I'd support an unequivocal ban on large solar farms on green belts, on the UK's best and most agricultural land, including 3B, and strong incentives for development to use rooftops, brownfield land, and poorer quality unproductive land. And he'll get the argument back to the Treasury, as we heard from my honourable friend who spoke earlier, that it's more expensive to use brownfield land. It's more expensive to use rooftops. That will be the argument that comes back. And the counter-argument is simply this. It's only more expensive in the first element of it, in the taxpayer element of it. It's not more expensive if you look at the dangerous impact on the lives and livelihoods and savings and investments and housing of the people we represent. Well,